This Sunday's Mass readings, particularly the Gospel readings, are kind of a conclusion here today of a 4-week meditation on the Eucharist. In some ways, it's been Jesus' own kind of Eucharistic Congress that I know some in our own parish went a month ago to the Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis. But this real idea of drawing people together from many places where Jesus is teaching, instructing, hearing their questions, performing miracles. And although I think a month ago everyone who left that Eucharistic Congress left with a real burning love for Jesus and his presence in the Eucharist, that's ironically not the case in the Gospel. At the end of Jesus' discourse, those who are listening start to murmur. And they start to say things like, "This is a difficult teaching." They start to murmur. Why would they say, "This is a difficult teaching"? You know, we talk about different interpretations in the Bible of how we interpret different things that are said. Some things we interpret very literally, some things we interpret more spiritually or allegorically. And this is something that the church has always interpreted very literally. And I think one of our greatest keys as to why we interpret it that way is found right in the gospel. That Jesus literally meaning, "This is my flesh, this is my blood, you must consume it," is proved at how they react, how the disciples react. Because those listening to Jesus take him literally. They say, "This is a hard teaching. Who can follow this?" And what do? They walk away. And then this key point where Jesus doesn't say anything. Jesus lets them walk away. He doesn't say, "Oh, you're interpreting me wrong. I don't actually mean that. How could I actually mean eat my flesh," right? He doesn't correct himself. He lets them walk away from him, knowing that they have interpreted his words literally. And then he turns to his apostles, right? And he asks them, "Do you also want to leave?" And he doesn't get a very hearty no in response. What do we hear? Peter says, "Lord, to whom else shall we go?" Almost as if Peter is saying, "Well, this is a tough teaching, and I'd rather leave. And yet, Lord, we have come to believe that you are who you say you are. We've come to believe in what you promise. And if we walk away from you, no one else promises what you promise." And so, in a way, Peter says, "We're stuck with you, and you're stuck with us." And so while it isn't this super emphatic yes, it's actually a great act of faith in who Peter believes Jesus to be. That Peter truly believes Jesus to be God. And this question that Jesus puts to the apostles, I think, is a question worth asking ourselves, or imagining Jesus asking us. Do you also wish to leave? Because there are times in the Christian life where the journey is very difficult. Right? Where it's arduous, it's hard to do the right things, especially when we can hear so many diverting opinions or things in the world, and that small kind of quiet voice of Christ that continues to guide us on through the church isn't always the popular decision. And that question, "Do you also want to leave?" can continue to ring in our ears. But we must pray for the courage to say with Peter, "Lord, to whom else shall we go? You have the words of everlasting life." The evil one oftentimes works in doubt through subtle lies, sometimes half-truths, actually. And we see that with the Eucharist right here, that this truth, that this is a hard teaching, the evil one can use that to say, "Well, this is a hard teaching, so you should leave." You can still follow Jesus by not following everything that Jesus says. Just choose the things that make sense to you. Choose the things you want to believe. Right? Playing off of this partial truth to actually totally divert us from this message of faith, this courageous call of Peter. To whom else shall we go? One of those subtle lies that the evil one has been trying to spread, in addition to doubt in the Eucharist, is to spread this lie that life can be disposed of at our own choosing. That we can actually control life and control death. This isn't something totally new. St. John Paul II talks much about this culture of life that the church has to proclaim. That's this message of Christ in opposition to the culture of death. The culture of death that we see throughout many cultures and many nations, where people seek to legalize euthanasia, what's called mercy killing, or trying to put inferior races, inferior types of humans out of existence, right? And things that have happened in far-off lands in different times aren't absent to us today. As we know here, even in our own state, the fight to legalize abortion is well underway. And our resistance, hopefully, in prayer, in action, is well underway as well. Because it's important for all of us to stay strong in what we know to be true and in whom we know to be true. That as Jesus says in today's gospel, he is the giver of spirit and of life. That life is not something we can choose to dispose of, but that it's a gift from God that we receive. I think many of you are aware of the amendment to be on our ballot this fall, Amendment G. Bishop DeGrood has been very vocal, along with the Bishop of Rapid City, of how dangerous this amendment would be if passed to women, to families, to our culture, as a state. Again, using these subtle lies and these half-truths. People who are trying to say, oh, this would actually be a good thing for families, a good thing for women, while actually totally undermining their value. Totally undermining the dignity that family life that women actually have. Even women in situations or crises, pregnancies, where they oftentimes are afraid. That it actually manipulates them, not seeking to truly help them. I'm a fairly competitive person, especially when it comes to sports. And I've played in different games and sports before where the rules start to be changed. And eventually, once the rules are changed so much, it stops being that sport. So there are times, take soccer, for example, probably what I'm maybe most competitive in. See some soccer players here tonight as well. If you take out boundaries, if you take out the out-of-bounds lines, if you take away the rules that you can't use your hands or that you can't foul, very quickly soccer ceases to be soccer. You get this changed thing that used to be soccer that now actually is nothing of that. Our nation is built on this premise that life is good and worth protecting. At its foundation, our nation defends that. And so in ceasing to stand for that, in some ways, would be advocating for America to cease, to actually change kind of at its core a principal value of our nation. But it would also be for us as professing believers in Jesus Christ, for us to cease to obey and heed and follow his own commands, for us to pick and choose the things that are comfortable, even to resist maybe these difficult sayings or teachings, would be for us to cease to be true, authentic followers of Christ. When we pick and choose the things maybe we want without giving full, humble subjection to what Jesus has revealed, to what we know to be true through reason. And so we as a church, we don't endorse candidates, but we can and must speak up on amendments, especially when they cross into the moral realm. That while this is in some ways a political issue on a ballot, it's a moral issue for our society. And it's something that the church actually says we ought to intervene by of saying how horrendous this would be for our culture. That the church, while not meant to govern governments, is meant to be a voice to proclaim what is good. And we're not advocating to make the Assumption a national holiday. We're seeking to defend human life. And so I ask for your response, as Bishop DeGroot is calling us to really pray and to understand the implications of this amendment, and to vote no on Amendment G. While Bishop DeGroot was at the Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis, someone approached him and said, "Bishop, I know who you are." This person was from another state, but said, "Bishop, I know who you are, and I am aware that there's an amendment for abortion coming up this year in your state." And this person said to our bishop, "I think the greatest difficulty you'll face is convincing people that it could actually pass." He said in many states that never thought it would pass because they had good pro-life laws in accordance before Roe v. Wade was overturned, saying it's in those places where people were complacent. They never thought it would pass, and so they didn't do anything. They didn't even vote for some of them. They didn't even explain the harmful implications. And so he said to Bishop, "Your biggest roadblock will be complacency." And so it is not only a responsibility of his, but a responsibility of ours. To vote no, but also to spread the word, and also to pray. To come as we hear these words of Jesus, that I am the bread of life, to come before Jesus in the Eucharist and to pray earnestly that all life, from conception to natural death, may be defended and protected and loved, that we may not succumb to a culture of death, but that we may truly hear his words as he says, that he gives words of spirit and of life.